I'm James. I actually grew up on lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I have since moved, and I now present to you today, and I'm raising my family on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And Nithya joins you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. On behalf of both of us, I'd like to pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders on the calls today. We want to recognise them as the traditional custodians of our country and pay our respects to any elders past, present or emerging. And just a brief overview of who we are and where we fit into the broader Adecco group. So for those that aren't already aware, LHH is part of the Adecco group globally, which is made up of three key global business units. Firstly, there's the Adecco business, which has over 50 years of staffing expertise. We've got the Acotis business, which actually works to help their customers accelerate their innovation. And they offer both tech consulting solutions as well as tech talent solutions, which is technical recruiting. And then, of course, you've got LHH, which exists to help people, teams, and organizations at every career moment. And that primarily is down to we've got career transition and mobility offerings, which we'll talk a little bit about some of those themes today. We've got, in particular, our leadership development offerings, and we'll deep dive into some of those key trends we're seeing around leadership development. And we also have one-on-one coaching through our Ezra business. So, it's a great opportunity, and we have a purpose of making the future work for everyone, which brings the unique talents of the individuals who work for all of those three brands together. So what's one of the benefits? I mean, the benefits of, sorry, if we just jump back, Nithya, that one of the benefits of having a group of this size is it actually allows us to invest in things. And so there are two key pieces of research that we're going to be referencing throughout the session today. And this year we looked at running, again, Global Workforce of the Future. Now, Global Workforce of the Future is a study we've been running since 2019. It runs with over 30,000 workers across 23 countries, 25 different industries. It was important to us that we captured the sense of both office and non-office roles. So therefore, when I'm talking about employee sentiments in the research today, we're talking about a 50-50 split in office-based and non-office-based roles. And it was important that we collect responses from local market and region. There were over 2,000 responses from the Australian business. In last year's, or the 2024 release of the research, we looked at two key themes. The first of those was, what's the global readiness and the impact of change? And then how does that flow through to the demands for leaders? And then secondly, what are the worker sentiments regarding job security and their expectations for the future? So when I'm referencing Global Workforce of the Future, or when Nithya is, you know that it is a detailed, global and comprehensive study. We'll also be referencing a study which is called View from the C-Suite. And so this is where LHH conducted a survey of 2,300 C-suite executives from Australia, Brazil, Canada, France, Germany, Singapore, Switzerland, the UK, and the US, with the specific intent of asking questions regarding their insights as to what was concerning them as senior leaders and what key trends were they seeing needed to be addressed or they wanted addressed to enable their leaders to better cope with the pace of change that was coming. So now let's take a look at some of the takeaways that we will leave you with today. So first and foremost, while the research helped us evolve our solutions and how we deliver to our customers, the hope today is that it's actually also going to help you generate support from your leaders and from your employees around how your organization is dealing with the future of work. We really, in sharing today's findings, hope that you can actually get support, budget, resource, whatever it is you need, because what we're going to cover today are the things that we believe are critical to be addressing right now for HR teams and to help your employees move on the journey at a time when the pace of change is unrelenting. And so some of the things we're really going to cover in detail. First is, why is it tougher for leaders? And what are the key trends driving this feeling within your leaders? In particular, delving into a little bit around the reasons between higher reported stress and burnout in leaders. And the second component is actionable insights and strategies to help achieve the following. First, how does HR position to support employees, build agility, and to support an organization's abilities to navigate change? Secondly, what matters most? Where can you focus for holistic development of leaders? And then thirdly, how can we help, or how can we share some insights to help reignite the ability for teams to work effectively together? So if that sounds good, let's get into it. So firstly, yeah, if we were to talk to leaders these days, the following statement might not be uncommon. It's, what do people expect from me? There's cost reduction targets, there's increased layoffs. This means many of my team are double hatting and complaining. And when I talk to them, I'm told or when I talk to my senior execs, I'm told you just need to get used to doing more with less. And then on top of all of that, there'll be a request for a critical change project that apparently is not optional. And I need to provide significant amounts of input with a short deadline. And for leaders, they're coming saying, hey, I'm concerned about stability of my own role. I want to focus on doing my job. I want to look after my team. I want to hit my targets to help us stay safe. And if it's ideal, I'd like to be able to earn my bonus this year because cost of living pressures are getting higher and higher, and I'm burning through my savings at quite a high rate. And so I use that as a practical example of the type of things you might be hearing from leaders when they're saying that, hey, we're pretty concerned about the direction of travel at the moment, and it doesn't look like it's changing anytime soon. I've been to a range of HR conferences this year and was at one in New Zealand last week, and the same message comes up time and time again. And that is that the rate of change that we're experiencing now, as much as people are overwhelmed by it, is probably the slowest rate of change we're going to see in the next decade. So if there's not a way to understand it and help support leaders, it's only going to get worse, not better. There is no just wait till 2025, everything will slow down, we'll get a chance to catch our breath. And so with that consideration, 73% of organizations, when we conducted this research, were saying that they had considered redundancies in 2024. And the trend since 2019 and moving into 2025 has been interesting and uneven when it comes to the intent here around whether people are actually taking on reshaping of the workforce and redundancies. In 2019, it was relatively consistent, and it had been over the last 5 years. Then 2020 hit, and we had the first half of the real COVID impacts, where the majority of people and organisations, while they were in lockdown, were not making any changes. Any planned changes were put on ice. And in the second half of 2020, there was this huge demand when it came to restructuring outplacement, because people thought that the work or the impacts of COVID, the move from retail to online, etc., as trends would fundamentally change the shape of the workforce. So the second half of 2020 saw a lot of activity. Then we had economies that were still fueled by huge amounts of stimulus, and things shifted. Does anyone remember all of the webinars about the Great Resignation and the fact it was impossible to get people? That was 2021 and 2022, where recruitment teams were saying, hey, we're the ones that are burnt out. We can't find people fast enough. There's massive talent shortages. What are we going to do here? And so there was a 2-year period there of where talent attraction was like a massive issue. And then almost the reverse. So for the last 2 years, there seems to have been a real driver for a number of different factors, and the trend has swung the other way, and there's been much higher numbers of uh, restructuring based on some key things. Now, there are still the old favourites, which is where there's cost reduction targets for a part of the business. There's still changes through mergers and acquisitions. But one of the things we've really seen over the last 2 years is actually an increased number of restructures and restructuring intent occurring because of either offshoring or because of the impact of technology and automation. And so what this means is that workers are now looking at things in different ways too. You can see from trends here, they're looking externally, they're looking internally. But perhaps the worst of all is the loss of engagement and the increasing trend of quiet quitting, which is where you've got ramped up work demands, but people are becoming less engaged. And then if you overlay that with some challenges and mandates around trying to get people back into, for those office-based roles, getting people back into office locations, you can see why leaders are feeling there's like a bit of a perfect storm here. And in fact, 55% of workers in Australia have said that this year they're concerned about redundancy, despite research also showing that their sentiments to technology and automation have actually become increasingly positive, particularly since the 2022 survey. So at the moment, the 2024 results were that 81% of people are positive about the change that will come to their roles through technology. And the numbers that were pessimistic have decreased from 37% who were pessimistic in 2022 to just 17% in this year's research. So I'm now going to take a bit of a look at the pace of change and what are the things that are currently impacting leaders. So I mentioned earlier, leaders are showing signs of becoming overwhelmed due to the pace of change. And there's this popular belief that the pace of change now is not slowing down and they need support, training, and engagement in order to be able to help them navigate it. There's really a change in sentiment, in my view, over the last 4 or 5 years, where change processes were more tolerant of change resistance than what they are these days. But with pace of change, the tolerance of change resistance and therefore the demands on leaders have been ramped up significantly. And so it's not an easy view. And so I mentioned before, the view from C-suite research that we did showed that 89% of leaders were citing that the ability to remain agile and respond to constant change is one of the top challenges. That's followed by the challenges of attracting and retaining talent, although I mentioned earlier, we've seen that attraction and retaining talent sentiment ease a little bit through 2024, but make no mistake, it is still a significant challenge when it comes to in-demand and critical talent segments where we simply just don't produce enough skills to meet market demand. And then there's also the debate between the hybrid, virtual, in-person working arrangements and work styles. And that's before we even think about the non-office roles where there's discussions on 4-day work weeks, flexible shift options. So it really is this almost perfect storm of things that leaders need to be able to navigate from a change landscape. And remember, they still have their same targets. They still have their same KPIs to meet with all of this uncertainty to navigate as well. So if we then move to take a look at what does that mean for worker expectations, and particularly worker expectations when it comes to the evolution around skilling and learning. So 56% of employees believe that their employer is responsible for helping them understand the changing nature of roles. So that is clearly communicating the changes are going to happen in the organization and what impact does that have for the roles within the organization. And then 48% of employers believe that it is the employer that is responsible to make sure that their skills stay relevant for the future. Only 33% of respondents told us that they believe it is their responsibility to be continually learning and upskilling to keep up with the pace of change in their organization. So if you have a leadership group or an organization that is not clearly articulating to individuals what change is important, what skills you're going to value in future, and exactly how people need to engage with you, then there is a real chance that you're going to enter this issue around, if I can't buy those skills in, if I haven't invested in, or people haven't taken up the opportunity to build their skills in this area, then there's going to be shortages, and those shortages can be incredibly detrimental to strategic objectives for an organization. If you are short on skills, it results in delays in release of new product, new innovations, new technologies. The list goes on. And so this is why it's such a critical consideration for leaders, and they're constantly asking, what are we doing, and are our people coming with us on the journey? And so that then leads into the difference between upskilling and reskilling. And so, very brief definition, but upskilling is where there is the opportunity for individuals to invest some time into picking up new skills, and it's normally done in and around pretty much a full workload within their existing role. Versus reskilling, and a lot of people call things reskilling, but reskilling from our experience only really works where there are a few massive considerations in place. One is that there is a consideration and a willingness for people to spend some discretionary effort, so they have opted in to reskilling. Two, there's an assessment that is done around people's capability to learn and reskill. Three, there is a very clear process around how they're going to acquire those skills, and that process on acquiring the skills must be vetted by the business, or the part of the business that they would be entering, in order to be able to use those skills. So you absolutely have to have buy-in in the business. There is no point putting people through a reskilling program and then having the business. So say you're upskilling people in data and analytics, and your data and analytics team look at the course and say, well, that's not sufficient. I wouldn't hire people who've been through that training in my business, because I don't think what they've covered is robust enough, or it's not specific enough for our organization. So it is often both the content and then a project, and ideally a project in conjunction with the business, that demonstrates the sufficiency of the skills they've learnt. And then finally, to have ring-fenced roles, and to be sure that those individuals that have opted in and invested their time and effort to reskill are actually placed in roles and practically apply the skills they've learned. Because upskilling can be something that's switched on for a broader group of people, and normally at a significantly lower price point per individual. Whereas reskilling is something that will generally require lots of time, effort, and cost per individual. So you absolutely have to be able to get an outcome. And if you reskill people and then you don't give them the opportunity to progress their careers, one or two things will happen, and I'm not necessarily sure which one is worse. They'll either spread the news that there's no point putting any effort into reskilling efforts, or they'll actually take those new skills, leave the organization, and end up somewhere else. So I'm going to pass over to Nithya now, who's going to head into a little bit more detail than what I did, specifically to what and how you can best engage your leaders for success. Over to you, Nithya.
Thank you, James. Hi, everybody. Lovely to meet you again. As James mentioned, I'm a solutions director within the LD business for Australia and New Zealand at LHH. I work with clients across multi-levels of leaders and across industries. And like many of you on the call, I'm deeply passionate about this space, and it's really meaningful to do this kind of work, with leaders and organizations, and really, this is really about building the pipeline of leaders for, better capability for today and tomorrow. So, really glad that you can make this time with us today. And as James has already mentioned, this part of the webinar will really focus on being a whole leader, and we'll get into that in a bit. But first, let me just paint a picture of our current landscape. So this is a rather busy slide that you see here, but really what this slide's telling us is that the demand for human skills has never been greater. You see a lot of things happening here. It's a complex and challenging landscape that many of us as people leaders, as HR business leaders, face and operate in. So if any of this resonates with you as what you see, feel free to pop that into chat in terms of those challenges that are sort of sitting with you now. You can see here an ambit of human and technology challenges, also tensions between challenges related to self and teams and the system. You can also see post-pandemic challenges and challenges around remote work or hybrid work, and leadership related challenges as well, which is about managing uncertainty within the organization, continuous change and transformation as well. I think the call out here is that there is a need to really work with complex and adaptive challenges. James talked about the Global Workforce of the Future report that's really looked at about 30,000 workers across 23 countries. Now, that report revealed two key challenges. One is agility in constant change, and the other one being adapting to reorganization. So these are the top two challenges facing leaders today. And nearly 90% of leaders that we surveyed noted that, these were one of the top challenges. I just want to also draw your attention to a concept called Barney, that's BANI, and that's sort of, presented in this busy slide. So B in Barney stands for brittle. Brittle is really about that context or that fragility in which we are operating in. As humans, we really want to be secure and strong, and we want to feel a bit stable, but in the environment we're working in, often things break or fail under stress. And sometimes, you think you got the answers and you've got the hypothesis, but you can't ever be 100% sure. So that's brittle. The A in Barney is anxiousness, so anxiety or anxiousness, which is the fact that, again, as humans, we want to feel certain, we want to feel in control. But the environment's actually the opposite. It is that fear of not knowing, it is that pervasive sense of worry, and there is that uneasiness about the future. The N stands for non-linear. Non-linear here being we want that sense of predictability, but in the context we are dealing with, there are detours, there are dead ends, and there are unexpected outcomes as well. So we got to be prepared for that. Things are not a linear path anymore. And finally, the I in Barney is incomprehensible. And again, here, as human beings, we think we got the answers. We often do hide behind our expertise. But again, leaders today need to be able to lean in and understand and acknowledge that we don't have all the answers. And again, here, Carol Dweck's work around growth mindset and, being willing to understand that, yeah, let's learn and let's keep growing is the way to go. So Barney helps us in identifying and addressing the underlying issues of, what we're dealing with, and the fact that human skills in today's landscape is really important. So what is that big challenge? What is the key skill that we want our leaders to be developing? So I'll just share that now on the next slide. And this is actually with another piece of research that LHH has done, and it's called the ICEO research. It's a smaller sample size compared to the global workforce of the future, around 2,300 C-level execs globally. And these were the 9 challenges that cropped up in terms of top leadership challenges. You can see here that 60% of leaders would like to still have more support when it comes to managing constant change. But on the right-hand side, that's where we see the top capability gaps. Interestingly, the top five relate to decision making. So we can say that decision making is quite a key challenge for many of us. We're dealing with a lot of decisions we need to make under pressure. We might not have all the information. Sometimes the challenges are so complex, they're often paradoxes, so there is no right or wrong. And often the answer is sort of gray. So which way do we go? And that whole concept of ethical, moral values also sort of step in into, how do we make this work and what's the right decision we make in the interest of others as well. So, what does this mean for us, and how do we really develop our decision-making capability, right? This is not just about going for another course or let me just go for a skills workshop around getting, a new tool around decision making. This is really about developing true agility. And agility here is about managing speed with stability. A lot of clients I speak to, they're often running on the treadmill. It's go, go, go every single day. But you need to be able to take that pause and weigh in and, take a big a back step and look at the bigger picture. So in order for us to make effective decisions or navigate this complex landscape, what we're really calling out for is this concept of being a whole leader. Whole leader here means leading with three approaches: the head, the heart, and the guts. So, if there's one thing that you're going to take away from our time today, reflect on being a whole leader and do share this with your teams as well. So, what does this mean? Head is really about the intellectual aspect of things. So, this is about critical thinking, problem solving, making that informed decision, and setting clear goals as you go, being really clear about your strategies and guiding the organization forward. Heart, good, that's got to do with your emotion, right? The emotional aspects of empathetic leadership and being sort of genuine and giving genuine empathy. So this is about that compassion and genuine care for your people. It's about building trust. And we hear a lot about this with leaders as well. How do I foster and build trust in the climate with the teams that I'm working with and that hybrid ways of working? And it's also about motivation and what drives everybody in the team. Guts is courage, courageous leadership, and that's really about having the courage to take risks, making tough decisions. Sometimes it's not easy to make a tough call, and we've got to go that way. And really standing by your values as well. So I'd like to ask you, how often have you seen leaders do all three? Sometimes a leader is guilty of just doing one and not the other two. And it sort of comes up in assessment or feedback that, hey, I need to lean into maybe doing more of heart versus just head. And when you are faced with a problem or challenge, what is your go-to approach? What perhaps do you do really well or not so well? So feel free to put that in chat if you don't mind, and it'll be interesting to see what's coming up for you. But what's important to note is when leaders balance all of these three qualities, what you're doing is really creating a holistic approach that strengthens your impact. It enhances your team engagement, and it will go a long way. So whenever you're making a decision or when you're dealing with a situation, it is about trying to manage and balance of head, heart, and guts. So as an example, I thought I'll also share with you a client example. So this is quite recent, where a client of mine is implementing a women in leadership program across the organization. And it's really about dealing with, gender equity issues and hotspots where there is bias. And this is a real issue for female talent wanting to be really confident and wanting to put their ideas across and influence more broadly. So here's where the head approach comes in, right? It's really working through trying to put a real good program, solid program together, trying to create a strategic plan, setting some measurable goals around gender equity and inclusion, and really being really clear about design parameters and what good looks like, what is best practice, what's the research telling us. Heart is about that genuine empathy. So try and understand what are the pain points these female leaders are going through, and how can their leaders show empathy and understanding as well as support for these female talent, and demonstrating a true genuine commitment to the DE&I purpose. And guts is about trying to address those bigger, deeper issues around bias, right? And inequities. Um, so one of the things that we did with this client was the leaders themselves putting their hand up to say, how can I actively support my people that are going through this, but what are the biases I might be holding, and how can we have a true dialogue around this as well? So you can see how head, heart, and guts really come together quite nicely here. So on the next few slides, we're going to invite you to do a poll. And what I'd like you to think about is on a scale of 1 to 5, how often you observe these behaviors in leaders in your organization. So we'll talk about that in a bit, and I'll just go on to the next slide. And we're going to be first looking at the head approach, and I'd like you to have a think here. As I said, head is about that intellectual, that analytical thinking and problem solving space. So if we can bring up the poll, please, and you'll see a rating there from 0 to 5, 0 being, well, not at all. I don't think my leaders apply this really well at all, versus a 5 where, I think our leaders are truly mastering this concept or this approach in their day-to-day and week on week. So have a minute or so to do this poll. And we'll give that 30 seconds or so. Cool. And if we can show the results of that poll. Wonderful. Thanks, Kat. So we can see the results here. It looks like we're pretty much leaning sort of halfway through there, which is a fairly balanced approach, right? So what we're seeing here is it's moderate, which is really about frequently using the head approach, demonstrating logical and database decision making, though it's not consistent across these areas. And I think this is quite common, James, in terms of, what you're seeing as well with your clients. Would that be right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And again, here with head, what we're really saying is, in order to bring that to a 4 or 5, and if that's really necessary in the situation, what do we need to do more of or get better at? And the advice there is really to balance, advocacy with inquiry. So sometimes we often see organizations where, you get used to this sense of efficiency and you're doing stuff, but then it sort of becomes that silo mentality of I'm just operating within my box and not really weighing into the larger picture of things. So, what would somebody else do in this situation? How can I better my knowledge in that area, or how can we work on this collective as a collective group as well? So that's really about trying to bring that to a 4 or 5. But again, also, how is that balanced off with heart and guts, right? So if you're exceptionally strong here, it's also that caution of, what might be the downside of that in certain situations. So let's go on to the next slide, which is on heart. And as I said, heart's really that genuine empathy, being able to connect with people and the, creating the trust and having that true compassion, as well as creating that environment where people feel safe and they feel truly committed as well. So let's bring up the poll here and have a sense check. where do your leaders stack up in your organizations around heart approach from 0 being, oh, no, not at all, versus 5 being mastering it? We'll give you a few seconds to a minute or so to put in your responses there. Amazing. We'll give that 30 seconds more before we close the poll. And again, it's really situation specific, but just being conscious of where do you really lean in to demonstrate that compassion, but also being cognizant of, what are the pitfalls of using the hard approach as well. Sometimes it might make better sense to go with more head or guts as well. So if we can close the poll and share the results, please. All right. So here we're sort of slightly, well, majority 40% with a rating of 2, which is a little bit. Leaders occasionally applying the hard approach, but it is not significant or well-developed part of their leadership style. So it's interesting. It might be that the situation demands that, or it might just be the way we're wired. We're just used to sort of being more practical and getting stuff done, right? But not that development opportunity if that exists. I think that's an important one for us to bear in mind and think about when does that warrant us to, show that compassion, because again, commitment and trust is part of high performing teams as well. All right, let's go on to the next piece, which is around the guts. And I think often for me personally, I think this is probably one of the hardest to implement. It's really being able to rise up to the challenge and go, hang on, we've got to make a right call here, but it could be a tough call for us. So taking some hard decisions, and sometimes it's also about the risk element. Um, so have a think here around the guts approach. How often do you see your leaders demonstrating guts in the day to day, in the week on week, from 0 not at all to 5 mastering it? And this is really about doing the right thing based on clear value. Sometimes it's dealing with adverse situations as well. Um, I think, James, I mentioned to you while we wait for the responses to come in, I think I mentioned about a facilitator in one of our client programs where, instead of sticking to the agenda because the organization just been through a restructure, that was sort of top of mind for a lot of folks in the room, and they were sort of really not just present, to attend another skills program. And the guts that the facilitator took right from the get-go was read the room and went, hang on, let's not look at the agenda. Let's really address what's going on for folks in the room. So to be able to turn that agenda upside down and have those hard conversations, I think took a lot of guts, but it was tremendously well received. And, the client was really happy as well that we took the time to do that.
Yeah, and in an environment that requires innovation and change and taking calculated risks, so it's just so critical at the moment.
100%. All right, let's close the poll and see what everyone's responses are there. All right, so we've kind of gone with majority, almost half of you have said 2 again, which is a little, and it means that you're basically seeing or noticing leaders occasionally apply this approach, but it is not significant. So think about those situations where it would really matter from a leadership perspective, and what that would look like from a behavior side of things as well. And again, if that's a development opportunity for us, how do we encourage that? Amy Edmondson speaks about this in her new book, I think, Right Kind of Wrong, which is sometimes, and things in that Barney context are, often fragile, but just being able to embrace that uncertainty and take some intelligent risks is what she refers to in that book. How can we reward that kind of behavior as well? So thanks everybody for taking part in those polls, and I hope that you got something out of it for yourself as well. And really, what I want to touch on next is just to share with you how we can strengthen our approach. You probably have a sense for yourself around, where you typically play or lean in on out of the head, heart, and guts in situations, and what might be possible development areas. So how can we strengthen our approach across these three areas? Um, Noting that, this is a guiding framework for us to help us exercise our head, heart, and guts in balance. So we're looking for that whole balanced approach. Often when you want to exercise head, it is about communication. So as I mentioned, it's the balancing of words with the asking of questions, right? Talk to somebody, talk to the other parts of the business, and get involved in that collective approach. When you exercise heart, it is often about collaboration. It is about leaning in to listen, and it's about creating that safe space for trust. And when you exercise guts, we say it's often about courage, right? And courage comes with understanding that deeper purpose. What's in it for me? What's in it for your team members? Understanding what makes them tick, and it's trying to create that clarity for them as well. So with that, I'd like to also share with you a self-assessment tool, and feel free to download a copy of this for yourself, and you can share this back with your team members and your colleagues. This is a nice checklist here. It really looks at the head, heart, and guts in terms of the tensions that we face. So for example, the head approach, you could potentially just go with gaining consensus, driving efficiencies, and just keep going. Go, go, go could be the approach. But on the other hand, it's also about taking that step back and getting that feedback. It is about deepening your perspectives and broadening your thinking about a challenge. So, which way do you lean towards when you use the head approach and you communicate or you ask those questions as well? So, feel free to download this and have do this as part of a team meeting or an activity with your colleagues to get a sense of where you operate typically. Um, and with that, I'd like to now pass on to James to wrap up the webinar.
Thank you so much. Incredibly insightful. So, some key takeaways, but before I burn through them all, a quick call out. Now is the time to get your questions in. So please use the Q&A function. We will have allowed some time for some questions at the end, so get them in now if you want to hear them addressed. So the key takeaways for today. The first one is there's going to be increasing pace of change. So do what you can to embrace technology, both as an individual, but as a leader within the business. And this requires a few things, in my view. First, got to have a clear plan, articulate the plan, and in particular, explain what those benefits are. Share as much information as you have when you have it as regularly as possible, because that's your way to increasing engagement. And if you need or expect an action, i.e., people to gain a greater understanding, to upskill, then make sure you state it really clearly, or don't be surprised if no action is taken. Secondly, you need to help the organization invest in individuals enhancing their skills. So I've spent a bit of time before on whether that's upskilling or reskilling. Remember, they're very different asks at very different price points. And so before you do anything, invest the time to think about how your approach is going to link back to a strategic plan. And ideally, that strategic plan becomes a workforce plan. So actually understanding the workforce impacts, understanding the skill sets that are required, and remember that it's absolutely critical when you're reskilling that that investment results in an outcome for the organization. You want to be able to enhance decision making. One thing when Nithya is talking about the ability for leaders to make decisions is there's going to be more data in future, and that's going to provide greater analysis through the capacity of AI. And what we really want to do is actually drive leaders that can make decisions. We don't want them caught up in decision paralysis. There's too much, there's too many inputs. I can't make a decision, because that is going to be highly detrimental to the organization's goals. So making sure that there's the right training in place in order to be able to use their uniquely human traits and really get that head component right, and make sure that those decisions are aligned and enhance the purpose and the culture of the business. And finally, holistic leaders. Nithya's shared both the details and an assessment that can help you consider how you want to build leaders that can lead with the head. Remember, that's the skills, the experience, and the knowledge, the heart, ability to lead with compassion and trust, or the guts, the ability to lead with courage and instinct.